okay, just like Venezuela, we'll have the Chavistas without Maduro, we'll have the IRGC without the Ayatollah. Are you going to then switch and be like, oh, that's great, we're just going to do a deal with the Ayatollah, successor, and the next Ayatollah, and the next IRGC, and then you're just going to switch and be like, okay, we're fine with the regime because Trump said it's fine.
Smug MAGA pundit Scott Jennings appeared as a guest on Newsnight with Abby Phillip during a heated debate panel that also included Cornel West and several other commentators. The conversation focused on Donald Trump and his increasingly aggressive conflict with Iran. In this video, we are going to look at some of the most intense moments from that panel discussion featuring Scott Jennings, Cornel West, and the rest of the guests on Abby Phillip's show. I also have some thoughts and reactions to share along the way, so let's break it all down and take a closer look together.
Now, the White House has had trouble hammering down exactly what their objectives are with this strike against Iran. President Trump tried to clear some of that up today. Destroying Iran's missile capabilities and its navy? Is it stopping any development of a nuclear weapon and preventing them from arming terrorists? And the question on everyone's minds, why now? Well, here's how Marco Rubio tried to explain it. Listen.
There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded, because the Department of War assessed that if we did that, if we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths. We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage.
So the logic here is that Iran would respond to an attack not by us, but by someone else, Israel, and that we would proactively attack them to prevent them from attacking us. That explanation, needless to say, is not going over well, certainly among Democrats. But I just heard in the last hour a Republican on the Foreign Relations Committee saying, I'm not so sure that that's the explanation that will work for him.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like a war in search of a justification, Abby, because remember, the reason why the march to war actually started was because of the Iranian protests in early January that were brutally and bloodily put down by the Iranian regime. Trump was writing on social media, help is on the way, come out, overthrow your government. He didn't help them. The protesters got slaughtered. And then gradually it took a month or two to build up U.S. forces in the region. And that time, the rationale for the war shifted again from helping the protesters to doing something about the Iranian nuclear program. But the problem is the two justifications that the administration put forward, neither one of those constituted an imminent threat, because we know that Iran was not enriching uranium. They basically stopped since the June attack, when, remember, Trump said he had totally obliterated the Iranian nuclear program. He had certainly set it back a good deal. And there was no evidence that the Iranians were building missiles, ICBMs, capable of hitting the United States. And so now they're really grasping for straws. And so you had Secretary Rubio come up with this far-fetched explanation that the imminent threat was Israel was going to attack Iran, and then we had to attack Iran, because if Israel attacked Iran, Iran would attack the U.S., which is ridiculous because Israel had never before attacked Iran before Donald Trump became president. Are you telling me that President Trump could not prevent his close ally, Bibi Netanyahu, from attacking Iran? I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, well, I mean, as we all know, Netanyahu has wanted to attack Iran for a long time, 40 years. He said so just this week. And as Ruben Gallego put it, a Democratic senator, so now Netanyahu decides when we go to war. What the F happened to America first?
Right. I mean, it's kind of amazing that 3 days into the war, that's what they're going with. That's what they actually came up with, that Israel dragged Trump into the war.
I will say, to be fair, not even to be fair, but just, it seems based on the reporting that it is true that Netanyahu personally launched a campaign with President Trump over the last month and a half to convince him to go to war with
Netanyahu's been launching that campaign for several decades. This is nothing new. This is what he's been wanting for pretty much his entire professional life. And the fact that the Trump administration's official explanation is that Bibi dragged us into this war, I don't think that's going to play well. Not with just the left and the Ruben Gallegos of the world, but with his base too. He doesn't seem to care that they are very much against the idea of America going to war in the Middle East again, and especially on behalf of the Israelis, whether that's true or not. And we don't even know if that's really true. So what we're seeing 3 days into this war is tactical brilliance. The U.S. military is amazing. They hit everything they wanted to hit. They killed more people than they thought they could kill. And strategic bankruptcy, because every single day, almost every single hour, the explanation changes. And if we don't know where we're going, then any road will take us there. And nothing about this was imminent. Nothing about this is a justification that has any resemblance to international or U.S. law.
So I happen to have a unique perspective on this. And the reason is because I work on Lebanon-Israel peace efforts. I'm close to several folks in the administration. And I heard since the beginning of last year that regime change was always an interest of this administration. So I knew that. And after June, after the strikes of last June, there was always an expectation that there would be round two. And so I view the urgency, if you will, if you can call it an urgency, that steeped in two issues. The first is that since June, after they were weakened with the strikes against the nuclear program, the Iranian regime reflected a desire to double down on their nefarious objectives. They continued to fund terrorist proxies across the region. Last year, they gave $1 billion to Hezbollah alone, and that's for a regime that has no economic leg to stand on. So they continue to do that. And we know that they were trying to retrieve elements of their nuclear program, at least. I'm obviously not privy to classified information, so I can't say that I don't know more beyond that. But the point is, on one hand, you had a proof that nothing was deterring this regime from its objectionable behavior. And then the second piece is that you have a regime now that has been a thorn in our side in national security. When I worked in counterterrorism in the Middle East, the majority of our resources, time, staff were focused on threats emanating from the Iranian regime and its proxies. And so suddenly you have it at the weakest point it has ever been in 4 decades. And on top of it, you see them trying to rebuild and double down on their efforts. And so I think the urgency came from an opportunity they wanted to seize, that this was the time to cut its legs off and see if they could push for a regime change.
None of that has anything close to an imminent threat in it. You're not even claiming that there was
imminent.
Well, that's what the administration is claiming, because that's the only legal justification for attacking. Yeah, a legal justification for going to war and putting American blood and treasure at risk. And yes, there should be some legal justification. And if we're just attacking every country that's a problem and that's weak, well, that's a long list of countries that you're now advocating that we should attack.
Josh Rogan is absolutely right about the point he is making here. And when he asks whether the United States should simply attack every country that is considered a problem or that Donald Trump personally views as a problem, it raises a serious concern, because with this administration that possibility does not seem impossible at all. And while Trump keeps repeating his claim that he supposedly stopped 8 wars, people should also be asking how many new conflicts his actions may actually be pushing the United States into. There are even reports circulating today that the United States has carried out attacks against Ecuador over what officials are now labeling as narco-terrorism, which has quickly become the newest buzzword being thrown around. But when people talk about Iran being a constant thorn in the side of the United States, it is worth asking whether that situation has partly been created by the United States itself, because decades ago the U.S. helped overthrow Iran's democratically elected government, simply because it refused to cooperate with American economic interests. And in many ways that pattern still explains a lot of these foreign policy decisions today. The reality is that it rarely matters whether a country is a dictatorship or not, because as long as that government is willing to cooperate with the United States on issues like oil or other valuable resources, Washington tends to look the other way, and Saudi Arabia is the most obvious example of this contradiction, since it is constantly treated as a close ally. At the same time, many MAGA pundits and politicians who regularly appear on these shows keep repeating the claim that Iran has been the leading state sponsor of terrorism for the last 47 years, while conveniently ignoring the role Saudi Arabia has played in many of the same conversations, including the well-known connections that have been discussed for years in relation to the September 11th attacks. That history rarely gets the same level of attention because Saudi Arabia is considered an ally, and because of that reality the United States was never going to target them in the same way, while Iran has remained a country that many neoconservatives, MAGA figures, and far-right commentators have openly talked about attacking for decades. When this latest conflict first began, there were even jokes circulating that someone like John Bolton must have been thrilled beyond belief, because after years of pushing for a confrontation with Iran, it looked like the moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. And as uncomfortable as that image might be, the larger point is that many of the people influencing policy have wanted this exact scenario for a very long time. With Donald Trump closely aligning himself with Benjamin Netanyahu, the path toward a confrontation with Iran seemed almost inevitable. And while many people originally expected something like this to happen during Trump's first term, it now appears that the timeline was simply delayed and that the conflict many predicted is unfolding now.
We attack the North Koreans? They're pretty bad. They support terrorism. They're against us. Should we attack the Chinese? They're pretty bad. They support a lot of things that are against us.
I think we're comparing
The
apples to
Russians?
oranges now.
No, I'm making a very consistent point, which is that you're not even trying to provide a justification for the war. You're just saying that it might be a good idea if it works out okay, and that's not good enough.
That's not what I said. It's if you have to, people, I think we have to think of the long-term interest here. And I don't see those who are arguing against the war thinking of the long-term interest. You have October 7 proved that all of these groups, and I'm going to put the regime in there, as amateur. We viewed them as amateur. We're way ahead of them. But that world is changing very, very dramatically. AI, technology, all of these groups are going to catch up with us. The regime.
If you're to start a regional war and without a plan, what does that mean about the long
They
term?
have much more of a plan.
What I don't know,
What
though,
is that
is
plan?
if
What is the
bombs.
plan?
But hold on, if bombs drop in.
Josh Rogan is absolutely right about the point he is making here. And when he asks whether the United States should simply attack every country that is considered a problem or that Donald Trump personally views as a problem, it raises a serious concern, because with this administration that possibility does not seem impossible at all. And while Trump keeps repeating his claim that he supposedly stopped 8 wars, people should also be asking how many new conflicts his actions may actually be pushing the United States into. There are even reports circulating today that the United States has carried out attacks against Ecuador over what officials are now labeling as narco-terrorism, which has quickly become the newest buzzword being thrown around. But when people talk about Iran being a constant thorn in the side of the United States, it is worth asking whether that situation has partly been created by the United States itself, because decades ago the U.S. helped overthrow Iran's democratically elected government, simply because it refused to cooperate with American economic interests, and in many ways that pattern still explains a lot of these foreign policy decisions today. The reality is that it rarely matters whether a country is a dictatorship or not, because as long as that government is willing to cooperate with the United States on issues like oil or other valuable resources, Washington tends to look the other way. And Saudi Arabia is the most obvious example of this contradiction, since it is constantly treated as a close ally. At the same time, many MAGA pundits and politicians who regularly appear on these shows keep repeating the claim that Iran has been the leading state sponsor of terrorism for the last 47 years, while conveniently ignoring the role Saudi Arabia has played in many of the same conversations, including the well-known connections that have been discussed for years in relation to the September 11th attacks. That history rarely gets the same level of attention because Saudi Arabia is considered an ally, and because of that reality the United States was never going to target them in the same way, while Iran has remained a country that many neoconservatives, MAGA figures, and far-right commentators have openly talked about attacking for decades. When this latest conflict first began, there were even jokes circulating that someone like John Bolton must have been thrilled beyond belief, because after years of pushing for a confrontation with Iran, it looked like the moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. And as uncomfortable as that image might be, the larger point is that many of the people influencing policy have wanted this exact scenario for a very long time. With Donald Trump closely aligning himself with Benjamin Netanyahu, the path toward a confrontation with Iran seemed almost inevitable, and while many people originally expected something like this to happen during Trump's first term, it now appears that the timeline was simply delayed and that the conflict many predicted is unfolding now.
On the nuclear program and destroying them last year didn't help move forward those objectives of deterring the regime. Why do we think that suddenly this is going to do the same thing?
Because the people who weren't deterred are now dead. That's number one.
But this is Iran. Those people are dead, but there are other people. They've got plenty of people.
I agree with you on that.
Plenty of Ayatollahs.
There's no indication.
7 layers deep on
we are 72 hours into this.
You're making a good case for this.
There's no indication, as we sit here tonight, that there have been any political changes in Iran. So my question is, if bombs dropping a year ago didn't change it, what is the rationale for thinking that bombs dropping today are going to change the actual political dynamics on the ground in Iran?
Well, look, you're asking a broad question about justification and what we intend to do with these guys over the long term. The justification is, A, we had a huge problem with the ballistic missiles, and we did believe that if Israel, according to the Secretary of State, attacked, and they intended to attack, that our bases were going to be targeted. They were not willing to absorb that attack, so we attacked. That is what the Secretary of State has said. You can agree with it, disagree with it, but that is the justification. That's number one. Number two,
you think that makes sense? You think?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that the Iranians are not shy about firing ballistic missiles across the region. I was in Israel last summer and watched many of them in the sky.
Where do you stand, Scott? Are you for this invasion or not? You seem to be dancing around the question.
No,
do you think this was a good idea?
No, I'm quite for it.
And
I think these butchers deserve to die, not just because of the missiles, not just because of the nuclear program, but for 47 years, Josh, they have waged war against Western civilization, against the United States. Their mantra is death to America. They have killed American soldiers, American personnel. They have maimed people, our people. And so if you want to go back decades or you want to go back 2 weeks, there's plenty of reasons to believe that those people that we kill being gone is good for U.S. national security. That's my view. I'm mourned, by the way. And we should say the loss of the U.S. service who I think died in a
President
noble
Trump makes
cause.
a deal with the next guy down in the IRGC and says, okay, just like Venezuela, we'll have the Chavistas without Maduro, we'll have the IRGC without the Ayatollah. Are you going to then switch and be like, oh, that's great, we're just going to do a deal with the Ayatollah, successor, and then the next Ayatollah and the next IRGC, and then you're just going to switch and be like, okay, we're fine with the regime because Trump said it's fine?
The president said his objectives are, and I think these are worthy, they're not going to have the missiles, they're not going to have nuclear weapons. If whoever becomes the next leadership in Iran says, okay, we're tired of being punished for missiles and nuclear weapons, that would be a good outcome that I think we would all be happy about.
Well, there's no, hold on, let me play this because Fox.
He really loves that exchange between Josh Rogan and Scott Jennings because Josh Rogan is absolutely right in what he is saying, while Scott Jennings is simply repeating whatever Donald Trump says and twisting logic in every possible way while doing all the mental gymnastics needed to defend it. If Donald Trump were to come out tomorrow and say the war is over, that they took out the Ayatollah and that was the only goal, and now it is their country and they can do whatever they want because the United States does not care who ends up in power there, Scott Jennings would show up that same night on Abby Phillipps' show or anywhere else he appears and say that the president is exactly right and that he completely agrees with everything being said. And if this situation somehow dragged on for another 10 years, Scott Jennings would still come out and claim that this is exactly what was needed and that the conflict lasting another decade was the right move all along.
On Fox Tonight, J.D. Vance was just speaking, and he talked about, I guess, how they see the objectives. And just listen carefully to what he's saying here.
He wanted to make sure that Iran could never have a nuclear weapon, and that would require fundamentally a change in mindset from the Iranian regime. So he saw that the Iranian regime was weakened. He knew that they were committed to getting on that brink of a nuclear weapon, and he decided to take action because he felt that was necessary in order to protect the nation's security. Whatever happens with the regime in one form or another, it's incidental to the president's primary objective here, which is to make sure the Iranian terrorist regime does not build a nuclear bomb.
Now, if you're listening carefully, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He's saying on the one hand that they need the regime's quote unquote mindset to change. But on the other hand, they don't care what happens to the regime. It can't be both of those things at the same time.
Not at all. And it's just so sad to see the worst of our humanity being manifest once again with all of this vicious, organized hatred, revenge, lies, crimes, cruelty, barbarity. And you get justifications from a variety of different camps. But at least we should try to aspire to some moral consistency and some ethical integrity. When I look at it, I just follow Martin King. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So I want to be in solidarity with anybody who's suffering. I come from a Christian tradition. We all made in the image and likeness of a loving and living God. And therefore we all have a dignity and a sanctity that the world can't take away and the world didn't give us. That's true for Palestinians. It's true for Iranians. It's true for Ethiopians. It's true for Israelis. It's true for Nigerians across the board. Now, when you look at it in that way, what do you see? What I see the gangsterism coming out of the White House. They lying, they rationalize. They killing American citizens here and rationalize it and telling lies. When I look at Israel, I see a government that's lying and got to deal with genocide with the noose around his neck. When I look at Iran, I see the gangsters who've been running that for 46 years. And I stand in very deep solidarity with the suffering and the heroic struggles of the Iranian people. Now, what kind of implications does that have for such a view? It means, in fact, that we're going to have to reshape our framework, and we got to get beyond these little partisan points we make or tribal moves we make or international relations discourse that's only about power and has little to say about moral power and moral integrity.
All right, we're going to put pause on our conversation here. And
I wanted to play this through just to hear Cornel West, because you really can't put it any better than what he is saying, and no one can honestly argue against his point here. We all know this war is immoral, this administration is immoral, Donald Trump is immoral, and meanwhile, smug MAGA pundit Scott Jennings just stares into the camera, mugs, and shakes his head. Anyone who disagrees with Cornel West in that moment is morally bankrupt, and that's exactly who Scott Jennings is, though he is playing a role. He has admitted at least once that it's like professional wrestling and that he's just there to put on a show, so who knows what his true beliefs really are. Regardless, we know he will go on Abby Phillipps' show and perform the mental gymnastics necessary to echo whatever Donald Trump says, and if Trump suddenly says the opposite of yesterday, Jennings will twist himself to parrot that too. It's frustrating that we don't have 100 voices like Cornel West on shows like Abby Phillipps for every smug MAGA pundit like Scott Jennings spewing nonsense night after night. But I want to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with Cornel West? Did you think Josh Rogan made an excellent point here, or are you on the side of Scott Jennings and his justifications? I don't see this as a just war, and I don't think most Americans do either, but let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.